Hello everyone and welcome back to DC Central, and in today's video we're going to be doing a ranking video, and this time we're going to be ranking all 6 of the major crossover events from the Arrowverse, from the worst to the best. So let's jump into it. So of course the big major annual crossovers that we look forward to every single year in the Arrowverse are huge events, and they are always just filled with so much fun and great character interactions from all the different shows coming into one another, and it just provides some really great television. But throughout the years, you know, we've had many of them now, 6 main annual ones, and they're the ones I'm going to be ranking, the 6 main ones. Not, you know, I won't be including the musical crossover, for example. I also won't be including World's Finest, which was the mini crossover between Supergirl and The Flash. Basically, anything that's, you know, that was just one episode, a crossover, will not be included within this. These are the multi-episode crossover events that we get every year. And, you know, some are better than others, and I think it's quite interesting when we see each other's lists and things like that, so make sure you leave your list in the comments down below. How would you rank these 6 annual crossovers? And also, just remember, this is all my own personal opinion. This isn't the absolute right list. I'm just saying, this is just how I feel, this is what I think. So with all that out of the way, let's jump into the first entry. So kicking off my list is going to be Heroes Join Forces. Now this was the crossover between The Flash Season 2 and Arrow Season 4, which its main purpose was to set up Legends of Tomorrow. This crossover to me just is by far the worst. Like for me, number 6 and number 5, there is a huge jump in quality. This crossover is just so boring and just unmemorable and bad for me. I think this crossover was just a bunch of nothingness. It was there to set up Legends, and it basically takes all of the worst parts from Legends of Tomorrow that exist in Season 1, and they are in full throttle here in this when it comes to the villain, who, you know, like the main villain of this crossover is Vandal Savage, who was of course the main villain of Legends Season 1, and he was just not a good villain. He doesn't work here, he didn't work on Legends, it was just a really bad villain choice. Also, this crossover really focuses on the Hawks, Hawkman and Hawkgirl, who are both awful characters on Legends Season 1 as well, and obviously this is where they first kind of showed up, and yeah, they were terrible in this as well. I didn't really enjoy their story, how they were implemented in, and then even when they were implemented in and went on into Legends, they were just really poorly handled characters. I didn't particularly enjoy the romantic relationship between Cisco and Hawkgirl. I didn't really think that was something that worked at all. I think the writers knew that as well, hence why they shipped her off to another show. For me, Heroes Join Forces, though, is probably the most memorable for being bad, because this was obviously during Arrow Season 4, which arguably the worst season of Arrow. I think that the problem that many people have with Season 4 of Arrow is obviously Felicity, and Felicity was probably at her worst in her entire series as a character within this crossover, because this is where we get the infamous scene where Oliver discovers he has a son. He didn't know this, he was never told about this, he just discovers he has a son, and the mother of the child specifically tells Oliver not to tell anybody about William, or Matthew as he was called at the time, because if you do, then you'll never see him ever again. So he, of course, doesn't tell Felicity, and then once Felicity does find out, because she was being really mental, she gets completely flipped out on Oliver, and she just goes, you know, how could you not tell me, you don't trust me? And then even when Samantha tells Felicity herself that she was the one who, you know, told Oliver not to tell anybody, otherwise you would never see his son again, she still blames Oliver. It's just stupid. This was just the point where Felicity became a super annoying character. Luckily, they kind of redeemed her in the next season, and she was fine for me personally from then on, but in this season, and in this crossover in particular, it was just horrendous. And then beyond that, just the, you know, the typical fun stuff you get in the crossovers, but just wasn't really apparent in this one. So for me, this is easily at the bottom of the list. So coming in at the number 5 slot, we have Flash vs. Arrow. This was, of course, the first proper official crossover that the Arrowverse ever did. We did have episode 8 and 9 of Season 2 of Arrow, where we were first introduced to Grant Gustin as Barry Allen, but this was where he actually became the Flash, and we had a proper crossover between the two. And this crossover was very memorable. I mean, the way they did the first episode on the Flash, where Barry was affected by that meta, which basically turned him into a killing machine, and they had to bring in Oliver to take him down, found was a really fun situation, because obviously it allowed us to have our Batman v Superman of the Arrowverse in that sense. It was a really cool fight as well, really cool. And then the second half, where we actually got the introduction of Captain Boomerang, the Arrowverse's version of him, and we got a really cool story with that. So I thought this was a really great crossover. Again, it kind of just showed us what, you know, what the crossovers could be, and how they were going to sort of do them, and how they were going to be structured, and things like that, how they were going to take place on each other's shows, and things like that. And obviously this was quite a small scale crossover in comparison to obviously what we get now, but it was still cool when you look back at this to see kind of where it began and how these foundations of the crossover started to build. And I really liked everything they established within this one, and it just started off as a really good way to kick off these crossovers, and was a really nice way of looking ahead at what we could be getting in the future. Coming in at number 4, we have Elseworlds. Now, Elseworlds has actually gone up for me. I actually had this at number 5 when I last ranked these, but Elseworlds for me is something that's changed a little bit. I think I was very underwhelmed and disappointed by Elseworlds initially, and that's because I think the writers and the showrunners, they really pitched Elseworlds as this big thing. They were coming out and saying, while this crossover will be smaller scale and won't be as large in scale as Crisis on Earth X, this is going to be a lot bigger in regards to certain comic aspects coming in. Like, they were really playing with these big ideas. Like, I remember them saying things, you know, when they introduced the fact that the Earth 90 Flash was going to be in it, and when they said that Dr. Destiny was going to be in it, and when they said that Psycho Pirate was going to be in it. They announced all these big things for this crossover, and they were little to nothing within the actual crossover itself. They would literally be like one cameo or one tiny little throwaway thing that had no actual connection. And that is what disappointed me about Elseworlds initially. However, now that I've kind of gotten over that disappointment, when I actually go back to Elseworlds now, because I've rewatched Elseworlds a lot of times, like, it might be the crossover I've watched the most, actually, I actually just realised the fact this crossover is actually just kind of fun. Like, it's just a really fun crossover. It's kind of throwaway, but it's kind of just, you know, a good fun time. You just have a lot really fun stuff going on. I mean, the concept alone is obviously just Oliver and Barry swapping powers, which is really fun. And then also we have the introduction of Batwoman, which obviously set up the TV series. And then I also just enjoyed how in the final episode they became the Trigger Twins, how they played around with that, and that leads into the final battle of Dr. Destiny. We get the Black Suit Superman in that as well. Just some really cool stuff within it. I just think Elseworlds, again, I think they did oversell it. I think that coming into the crossover, they had all these big ideas, and of course this was essentially the prelude to Crisis on Infinite Earths, because we did have the Monitor introduced here. But it just didn't actually do much. It was just kind of there to kind of set up some basic ideas, and for us really to get introduced to the Monitor, and so we could see Oliver's conversation with the Monitor, so he could see, you know, we could see the deal that he made with him, which basically set up the storyline for Season 8 going into Crisis. So it serves a purpose, but it also, everything else, that wasn't really what they focused on in the marketing. I think, you know, in the run-up to it, they were really focusing on these big ideas, and unfortunately none of them really came into fruition. Particularly someone like Psycho Pirate. Like, they made a big deal about Psycho Pirate coming into this crossover, and he was just Now, bringing us into the top 3, we have Crisis on Infinite Earths. Now, this has also gone up for me. I watched Crisis very recently. Well, I rewatched it very recently. And Crisis, I mean, the first time I watched it, I was disappointed. I thought it was very much focused on actually just pure fan service and cameos and things like that, without actually writing a compelling and good story. And also, you know, you guys, I'm sure many of you watching this have seen my last video where I did my season overview for Arrow Season 8, and you guys know how I feel about Oliver Queen becoming the Spectre and things like that. I'm not going to go into it here. If you want to hear my full thoughts, check in that video, because I go very much in depth. So even though I do have my initial issues with Crisis, and I still have those issues, I still feel like this crossover was written purely for fan service, which isn't a bad thing. Like, it's not a totally negative thing. It's just one of those things where this needed to be a really tight story, and it wasn't. Especially because this is a 5-part crossover as well. This is the biggest one they've ever done. This was 5 episodes. It just didn't really feel that coherent from 1 to 1, particularly in the early parts. Like, 4 and 5 feel pretty coherent for me, but the first 3 not so much. It's kind of a lot of jumping around. But Crisis, like, there's no denying the scale of it. Like, there's no denying how truly tremendous it is to pull off something like this. Like, this was easily the most ambitious crossover probably in television history. I feel pretty confident in saying that. I think that it's one of those things, it's just so many characters, so many different shows coming in, you know, they handled so much. They had to handle the death of Oliver Queen, who was, of course, the character that kicked this all off. They had to handle his death. They had to wrap up the storyline with the Monitor and the Anti-Monitor. We had to get background for them. Even though they didn't really give us any background of the Anti-Monitor. We got a little bit with the Monitor, but not really the Anti-Monitor. They also had to establish the Paragons. We had to go through that. We had to get introduced to a big new character like Ryan Choi. And we also had to go through and get all these cameos out the way that they have booked. Like, obviously, we got Tom Welling returning. We got Tom Ellis from Lucifer. Ezra Miller showed up as The Flash. We just had all these insane, crazy cameos. And they had to tackle all this within the space of 5 episodes, and I think they did it very well. And I think the Crisis as well, it's a very fun crossover, of course. It's got a lot of great moments. It's also a very emotional crossover as well. This is easily the most emotional crossover for me. Like, you know, even though, again, I have my issues with Oliver and how he was handled and the Spectre situation, there's no denying that his death and his ultimate demise is incredibly emotional for me, and I absolutely love everything they do with Oliver, technically, in the episode 5, like the Legends episode, with Sarah kind of commemorating him, them going back to Star City, and then we get the funeral with the Justice League in the Hall of Justice at the end. It's just fantastic. And I find it so emotional. And also what I loved about this crossover as well is that this really brought back characters like Sarah and Ray from Legends and returned them to their state that they were before they joined Legends. Which is, you know, Sarah is a completely different character on Legends than when she's anywhere else in the Arrowverse. And this truly felt like Sarah, and she was easily the MVP of this crossover, hands down. So I really enjoyed Crisis a lot more on the rewatch than I did the first time. But I still don't think it's the very best crossover out there. And the runner-up is Invasion. Now, Invasion was kind of the crossover that really kind of sent the Arrowverse into the next level, because this one was the introduction of Supergirl as well. Supergirl was folded into this one, and also, to be fair, this was really Legends being folded in as well, properly. So this was a really cool one. You know, they brought in the Dominators, who are really cool characters from the comics. They kind of, even though they are kind of just like faceless aliens who they were there to fight, it was still really cool to bring them in and kind of have that storyline play out. Also, what I really liked about Invasion as well is that it really played up Flashpoint, because this whole thing kind of happened because of Flashpoint, and I think it was really cool that all the characters in this crossover were kind of pissed off at Barry. I thought that was really quite good, you know, because Barry is kind of always that good guy hero who everyone can get behind, and he's like the nicest guy ever. I kind of like the fact that in this crossover, most people don't really like Barry in this crossover, because a lot of people are just like, we're dealing with this threat because of you. And also, like, you know, Cisco's brother is dead because of you, technically, and Diggle's kid has changed gender technically because of you. Like, you know, he has a daughter instead of a son now, or he has a son instead of a daughter now. That's all your fault. So I like the fact that basically everyone except for Oliver is basically just at Barry's throat in this, and I think it's really cool. It's just something different. It's a different dynamic than what we've seen. And also Supergirl coming in was really great. I love the dynamic between Oliver and Supergirl in this crossover, and that Oliver just doesn't trust her at all, and Supergirl doesn't really like Oliver, so I think that's a fun dynamic to play with. And also this crossover did have the 100th episode of Arrow within it, which is easily one of my favourite episodes of Arrow. It's just such a beautiful send-off. I mean, every time Arrow does these big episodes, it's always really special, but this one, the way they brought everyone back, like Robert and Moira, just really, really good stuff, and it really felt like a true commemoration of Arrow. It was a fantastic episode for Katie Cassidy as well as Laurel. I just loved everything about that 100th episode, and I just think this one was really fun. Like, I look back on this one with such fond memories, as it truly felt like, you know, it had stakes, it was fun, but it wasn't super serious at the same time. It was just one of those things that was a really great time, and I was very happy with it at the time. But number one is easily, no questions asked, hands down, Crisis on Earth X. They have never topped this crossover, and I'm not sure if they ever will. I mean, Crisis on Earth X was really them. Like I said, Invasion was the first one where they really had all 4 of them kind of folded in. This one truly felt like the wheels were truly oiled and turning in this one, because in Invasion, while it was really well handled, obviously Supergirl didn't really have her own episode within it, so that was kind of a weird thing. It was only a 3-part crossover. This was a 4-night crossover where Supergirl had her full episode, and everyone was involved, and it truly felt like that. This was a truly big event, and I love the concept of this. You know, Nazi versions of all of our characters from an alternate Earth show up, and we get to see, you know, all of the main characters essentially play evil versions of themselves. We got to see Melissa Benoist as the evil Supergirl. We got to see Stephen Amell as an evil Green Arrow, which was really cool. They got Tommy Merlin to play the Earth X Prometheus, which was like an amazing wink to camera moment. That, you know, because obviously the big theory in Arrow Season 5 was that Tommy Merlin was Prometheus, so they got him to play Prometheus on Earth X. That was really cool. And even though we didn't get to see Grant Gustin play the evil Flash, obviously we got, they did Reverse Flash instead. I think they did that purely just because the season before that, obviously Grant Gustin played Savitar, so I think they probably wanted to, they didn't want to do basically something that would feel too familiar. But it was really cool with the concept alone. And actually traveling to Earth X, it was a really exciting location. It just felt so different and desolate and scary to be in. And we got to see like the Earth X Quentin Lance, who was genuinely amazing. I loved Paul Blackthorne actually getting involved in these crossovers. That was really fun. We got to see the introduction of Russell Tovey as the Ray, who I really wish he'll return because he was really cool. I mean, he technically has a cameo in Crisis, but I think that's just old footage, so it doesn't really count. But it was really cool to get him in there. We got to see Citizen Cold as well, who I may have even preferred to Captain Cold. Like, Citizen Cold was a really cool addition. I really liked it when he came back later on in The Flash that season. That was really fun. And I just think that this all culminates in probably the greatest final battle. I mean, the final battle in Crisis on Infinite Earths, you know, at the Battle of the Dawn of Time, is really good. But I think that this one, on Crisis on Earth X, like, when we just see all the heroes lined up, it just felt so... It's like that. It's essentially the Arrowverse's version of the Endgame fight, you know, where you just see everyone lined up. It's kind of like that in Earth X. You just see, you know, a couple of members of Team Arrow, a couple of members of Team Flash, most of the Legends, Supergirl, even Alex is there. Everyone is just ready to storm on the Earth X Reich, and I thought that was just a really awesome fight. Especially the fight, you know, Barry and Eobard in that fight were really good. You know, Barry almost kills Eobard there, and he's just playing with him. The Oliver and Oliver fight was really cool as well. I loved the Earth X Oliver. I thought it was a great addition. And, like, the way they had the relationship between the Earth X Oliver and Earth X Kara was really interesting and really different. That completely took me off guard. I just thought that this was all really well done. It was just so exciting, and it also had stakes as well. We lost Martin Stein in this crossover, and that was a huge death. Obviously, these crossovers hadn't really killed anyone major like that before, and we got to actually see the death of Martin Stein, which is truly one of the most emotional moments in the Arrowverse for me. Like, the way Jax reacts to it is genuinely heartbreaking, and I cry every single time. I think Martin Stein was such a great character in this series, especially on Legends. When he died, I truly felt it, and it was kind of sad for Jax as well, because it basically had to force Jax to leave the series because he was essentially an irrelevant character. He was kind of pointless now without Stein. So I thought it was really cool just the way this crossover, again, it's pure fun as these crossovers always are, but it truly felt emotional and had stakes, and I truly felt coming out of this crossover, as awesome as it was, I also felt like we had suffered a tremendous loss, and I think that's the perfect blend of all of this, because the death of Martin Stein was one that felt timely, it felt needed, and also a death that I think really paid off in this crossover. Whereas in comparison to Crisis on Infinite Earths, while Oliver kind of made sense, I still completely disagree with how it was handled and everything like that. Like, I actually thought Ray Palmer was going to die in Crisis. I thought that was going to happen. Just because we knew Brandon Routh was going to be leaving the series in Season 5, and I thought maybe that was his way out. Maybe he was going to die in Crisis. And I thought that Ray Palmer was a really good character to actually kill. Like, he would have been a good one to kill in that crossover. Like, he's a big character, he's beloved, people love him. To kill him off like that would make sense. But obviously they killed Oliver. But with Martin Stein in Crisis on Earth X, he's kind of like a Ray character in the sense that he fits the death template very, very well. And it really had an effect on Legends going forward as well. That season of Legends was heavily affected by Martin Stein's death. So I think Crisis on Earth X overall was just the perfect combination of all the best elements of these crossovers, you know. There's just all these different elements where it's fun, it's got great action, it's got a great concept, and it's also very emotional and very tragic and very, very, you really feel the loss of it. And I think that was a really great blend of it all, and I just loved Crisis on Earth X. I watch it all the time. I could just constantly watch it. I thought it was fantastic, and for me, it's easily the best crossover. I hope they can top it, you know, I'd love for them to top it, but I don't know if they ever will, but I'll leave that up to you, CW. If you can do it, please be my guest and go ahead. But that's just how I would rank all 6 of the major annual crossovers. How would you rank them? Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Is yours the same as mine, or is it going to be a little bit different? Whatever your list is, leave it down below, and we can have a cool, nice discussion about it down below. It's always fun to see how different our lists may be, so I'm excited to hear your thoughts down below. And as always, guys, if you want to see more DC content like this, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any uploads from me, and hope to see you guys again in my next video.